All right, chapter 26, the four canonical Gospels continued. The Gospels as a group. Considered together as a history, the Gospels are fragmentary and incoherent and far from harmonious. In the first place, there is a radical difference between the Gospel of John on the one side and the three synoptics on the other. In the synoptics, Jesus speaks in parables and proverbs. Short, pithy sayings are ever on his lips. In John, he indulges in theological discourses. In the synoptics, his ministry lasted 1 year, seen Galilee except the last few days of his life. In John, his ministry lasted some 3 years, and the time was spent mostly in Jerusalem and other parts of Judea. There are a few places where the four Gospels run parallel. There are parallel passages more or less similar concerning the feeding of the multitude on 5 loaves and 2 fishes, Jesus riding into Jerusalem, the reference to his betrayal when in conversation with his disciples, the prediction of his denial to Peter, the smiting by Peter of the servant of the high priest, the denial of Christ by Peter, the question of Pilate to Jesus asking him if he was the king of the Jews, the scene concerning the release of Barabbas, the crucifixion of Jesus with some few of the circumstances attending it, the parting of his garments, the crucifixion of the thieves, the title on the cross, the begging of the body of Jesus, his burial, and the visit to the sepulchre. In these, however, there is considerable diversity and even contrariety of statement. Then, again, John is parallel with Mark and Matthew in the account of Jesus walking on the sea and of the woman who poured ointment upon him. John is also parallel with Mark in the appearance of Jesus to Mary Magdalene after the resurrection, though the account is much amplified in John, and is parallel with Luke in the report of Pilate to the Jews that he found no fault in Jesus, and with the visit of Peter to the sepulchre with, as in the case of Mary, much amplification. With the exception of these and perhaps 2 or 3 other passages, everything in John is different from the other Gospels or very differently related. Any consideration of the Gospels as a group must therefore be confined to the other 3. The Synoptic Gospels. No question connected with gospel history has attracted more attention or elicited more discussion than that of the origin and formation of the Synoptic Gospels, Luke, Mark, and Matthew. Volumes have been written upon it, but with very unsatisfactory results. That they are not merely copied one from the other with changes is the almost unanimous verdict of biblical scholars. At the same time, there's a resemblance not in incident merely, but in language also, is so close as to indicate some common source which was drawn upon in their construction. As to the nature of this source, some have supposed an original gospel, others several original fragmentary gospels, others again have believed them written mainly from oral traditions. Eckhorn thought but one document was used by the 3 evangelists, that additions had been made to different copies of it, that some of the evangelists had some of these copies, others, that everything found in common in the 3 synoptics was in the common document. In one respect, the theory of Eckhorn deserves special attention, recognizing as it does the natural result of accretion. He considered those portions which were common to Matthew and Mark and not in Luke, additions made in these copies of a common document, which were used by Matthew and Mark, and in like manner that those portions found in common in Mark and Luke and not in Matthew were additions made in copies used by Mark and Luke. Bishop Marsh made a thorough examination of the subject, and his views may be condensed as follows. 1. The 3 evangelists used copies of a common Hebrew document. 2. Matthew used this with some additions in writing his original gospel, which Marsh supposes to have been in Hebrew. 3. Mark and Luke translated the common document into Greek and used, besides other another Greek translation of it. 4. Afterward, Matthew was translated into Greek by someone who made use of Mark and Luke. 5. In addition to the common document, there was another containing only precepts, parables, and discourses of Christ, which was used only by Matthew and Luke, who had different copies. This theory, though quite complicated, comes nearer probably than any other to explaining all the facts on the hypothesis that Matthew is a mere translation. That hypothesis is, however, pretty nearly abandoned. Schleiermacher, not looking upon the theory of Marsh as satisfactory, discarded the hypothesis of a common original gospel and undertook to show that Luke, which he considered the principal and the most reliable gospel, consisted merely of a collection of a large number of manuscripts compiled and arranged by someone who wrote nothing more than was necessary to adapt the phraseology to a continuous narrative. This theory deserves the most careful attention. It may prove to be the key to the whole subject, especially if it shall become established, as we believe it will be, that Luke was the first of these Gospels and was written after Marcion. Ewald supposes an original Gospel containing the record of the baptism, the temptation, and the passion. This was the substructure used by Paul and composed perhaps by the evangelist Philip. It was in Greek. Then followed the Hebrew oracles by Matthew, which, with some narratives, contained nearly all the discourses of Christ. Then came Mark, and after that Matthew and Luke. In all these theories, too little attention appears to have been given to the evidence indicating a late date of these Gospels, too little account taken of their close relation to the apocryphal Gospels, and the law of accretion in its application to the question has not been sufficiently considered. Other things being equal, the shortest document is the oldest. Not until this fact is recognized can the complicated questions connected with the Synoptic Gospels ever be solved. The character of the Synoptics is well delineated by Mr. Sunderland as follows. At least 3 of the 4 Gospels can have had no real authors as we usually understand that word. They are the work of editors. They are compilations. They are mosaics, the material which enters in to make them up being real utterances of Jesus, real events of his life, together with more or less of legendary elements and deviations from historic facts, occasioned by the lapse of years and the necessary imperfections of the human memory. The law of accretion applied to the canonical Gospels, the result of a careful comparison of the 4 Gospels, noting all the parallels which consist not of short passages merely, but of continuous narratives, may be stated as follows. 1. Luke compared with Matthew. In 92 parallels, Luke is the shorter in 44 and the longer in 32. The others about equal. 2. Luke compared with Mark. In 95 parables, Luke is the shorter in 57 and the longer in 21. The others equal. 3. Luke compared with John. In 19 parables, Luke is the shorter in 13, the longer in 4. The preponderance of shorter passages in Luke, as compared with Matthew, is as 11 to 8, as compared with Mark as 19 to 7, as compared with John more than 3 to 1. Of all the parables, 206 in number, Luke is the shorter in 114, the longer in 57, proportion 2 to 1. This points to Luke as the older gospel unless some other reason can be assigned for its greater brevity. 4. Matthew compared with Mark. In 105 parables, Matthew is the shorter in 44 and the longer in 35. 5. Matthew compared with John. In 22 parables, Matthew is the shorter in 13 and the longer in 7. 6. Mark compared with John. In 23 parables, Mark is the shorter in 12 and the longer in 10. According to the law of accumulation or accretion, the order of date of these Gospels would be Luke, Matthew, Mark, John. We think, for reasons that will be given in a subsequent chapter, that the Gospel of Matthew constitutes an exception to the rule, and the true order is Luke, Mark, John, Matthew. This order for the Synoptics agrees with the conclusions of the Reverend Mr. Sandy as to the relative correctness of the 3 Gospels. The very same investigation, says he, which shows that our present St. Mark was not an original gospel, tells with increased force against St. Matthew. When a document exists dealing with the same subject matter as 2 other documents, and those 2 other documents agree together and differ from it on as many as 944 separate points, there can be little doubt that in a great majority of these points it has deviated from the original, and that it is therefore secondary in character. It is both secondary and secondary on a lower stage than St. Mark. It has preserved the features of the original with a less amount of accuracy. The points of the triple synopsis on which Matthew fails to receive verification are in all 944. Those on which Mark fails to receive verification, 334. Or, in other words, the inaccuracies of Matthew are to those of Mark nearly as 3-1. The inaccuracies of Matthew as compared with Luke he estimates at 5-1. The time when the four Gospels were written cannot be definitely determined, but may be approximately stated thus: Luke AD 170, Mark 175, John 178, Matthew 180. The theory of a common document for the Synoptic Gospels so ably advocated by Eckhorn cannot be considered as overthrown. The fragmentary character of Luke has, it is true, been quite conclusively shown by Schimmelmacher. But suppose the common document was of a like fragmentary character and was itself a compilation. Suppose one copy of this came to the hands of Marcion and was afterward used by the author of Luke, each of whom made additions from other manuscripts. Suppose other copies of the same document in later stages of accretion came afterwards to the hands of the other gospel historians successively, and were used by them with additions of their own or from other manuscripts. This would account for the complicated phenomena which are presented by the Gospels and which have proved so perplexing to commentators. Eckhorn did not believe, from a comparison of the four Gospels with each other and with older documents, that they came into use before the end of the 2nd century. Thus, his theory, based upon internal criticism, harmonizes with the historical evidence, a fact which entitles it to greater consideration.